Then there's the point of when were these Gospels written? And so a lot of people say, well, it was written in the late first century. These Gospels were written in the late first century. But there's no reason to believe that other than you get predictions by Jesus of the destruction of Jerusalem. And so people who don't believe that you can predict the future will say, well, these must have come after the destruction of Jerusalem because they tell us about the destruction of Jerusalem. But others have said, well, look, these phrases mirror the destruction of Jerusalem by the Babylonians 600 years before. So they don't have to be seen as actual statements about the destruction of coming destruction of Jerusalem if you really don't believe in prophecy.
Yeah.
But the biggest thing, and I've said this before, but to expand on it, you look at the Acts of the Apostles. It's written by St. Luke, who wrote St. Luke's Gospel. So it's written after St. Luke's Gospel. It ends around AD 62, when Paul is imprisoned in Rome. Now, if it was actually written after the destruction of Jerusalem, Luke would say that because he doesn't refer to the fulfillment of prophecy in other parts of his Gospel and in the Acts. But he doesn't use the opportunity to say, look, Jesus said the destruction of Jerusalem is going to happen. Look, it happened. So it's pretty clear the ending of Luke's Gospel is because that's when Luke wrote it and he hadn't yet been aware that Jerusalem is going to be destroyed. So if his Acts of the Apostles is written at AD 62, then the Gospel of Luke must have been before then. And since Luke's Gospel is seen as being after Matthew and Mark, they must have been even earlier. So we have the Gospels really before AD 62, possibly even John's, but we don't know because the fathers would say John wrote late, so that could be after Luke. Okay, but Matthew and Mark, we can confidently say, and Luke, the Gospels were written before AD 62, probably in the 50s.
Yes.
So all in all, we have a set of Gospels which we can rely on as utterly faithful. And the only thing we'd say to the Protestants who would say, oh yeah, then okay, Bible alone, why not? Yeah. We say, well, actually, just because we've got the historical information lined up correctly, that doesn't mean they're the inspired word of God. It shows they're written when they're written. Yeah. But if you want to say they're the inspired word of God, you need an authority outside of the documents to confirm that. Because nothing in there says they're the inspired word of God. Yeah. And that's where the Catholic Church comes in. Or if the Protestants don't like us, they must find some other church. Yeah. Or some other person who's a great prophet. Yeah. And that's really why we can be confident that our religion is the most historically based of all. And we can be confident in it. Yeah. So anyway, so that was really what I wanted to talk about particularly today. Don't know whether there's any thoughts on any of that?
Question. Mm-hmm. Maybe it touches on one we're slightly talking before.
John, I can't pick up your question. If you're not, I'd like to pick up your question on the mic.
Okay.
So
I'll try and speak loud.
Okay, all right.
That would put the gospel, or the canonical gospels, at 20, 30 years after Christ dies.
Well, I would say that if you have the Acts of the Apostles AD 62, then Luke's gospel comes before that. So that could be, say, AD 55 or late 50s. Then you have Mark's, which depends on whether one regards Mark or Matthew as first, but say we take traditional Augustinian view and we take Mark's comes just before Luke. Then you have Luke, say, in the early 50s. Matthew in the late 40s or early 50s. And if Jesus dies in AD 33, then you've just got less than 20 years
it's still in the
past.
First generation.
Yeah.
It's within, whereas the Sunnah was 4 generations. So
well, yeah, that's
a minimum of 4 generations.
Yeah, that's utterly unhistorical. But with our religion, you have the apostles, many of whom may be younger than Jesus, or some of whom will be younger than Jesus. So although they were martyred, eventually they'd live, of course, into the 50s, into the 60s. The wider group of the 72 disciples that are referred to in the Synoptic Gospels, they will contain many young people, and they would live through to the end of the century. And then you have another group that are just those who hear Jesus and follow him, and they would live on towards the end of the century. So all these people have heard Jesus, seen his miracles. If the Gospels are being produced, they're going to be the writers of these Gospels are going to be very careful to ensure that those Gospels will not be picked up on and criticised as being just a bunch of stories. Because there are plenty of eyewitnesses alive through the first century. Especially, the apostolic men, those who knew Jesus directly. And so we have good reason to believe that we've got, for all kinds of ways, to believe what we've got is authentic.